Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith discusses selling strategies for corn and soybeans. Rodrigo Werle describes the Brazilian soybean growing season. Rick Rasby explains how feeding times can impact when cows calve. And Dave Aiken outlines another opportunity for the Keystone XL Pipeline. Roy Smith is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. With the U.S. Department of Agriculture finalizing its numbers for the 2016 harvest a few weeks ago, estimates for corn and soybean output now turn solely to South America. The agency's next look at supplies for Argentina and Brazil is scheduled for February 9th. There will be another update in early March before the USDA's first survey-based acre projections for American production in 2017. On March 31st, the agency is slated to release its report on prospective plantings across the country. While this period may seem slower for hard data, the January to February transition triggers one of Roy's always-never strategies. We talked with him Wednesday afternoon about why he never sells soybeans in February, but we started by asking for his analysis on recent price movements in corn and soybean markets.
Well, first of all, the soybeans, we had a nice rally after the first of the year, and really, in terms of the futures market, a nice move up, but we didn't get much improvement in the basis, and so we're still almost a little short and breaking even on the beans that are in storage. And in terms of the corn market, it's up and down a little bit, but just not, seems like it never goes anywhere. And we did get a little bit of a rally here a couple of weeks ago, and picked up maybe 15 or 20 cents on the corn market, but then it backed off, and we end up back almost where we were, not quite. So it's been frustrating, but then that's this time of year, that's what you get. You know, I said, always had one of the principles in my marketing workshops, the function of the market in January and February is to make farmers mad, and it's working pretty well.
Describe why basis has been so disappointing.
Well, personally, my opinion is that the basis has been frustrating because we still got corn piled on the ground some places in Nebraska, and I don't know how much is piled on the ground or exactly where, because the elevator that I go to never really did have any piled on the ground, but they managed to keep it moving. But one of their branches still does have corn piled on the ground. And my thinking on the soybeans is the reason that the basis is so bad is that we had a tremendous crop here in 2016, and those beans are still available for the processors to use. They're probably all hedged in a bin somewhere, but they are there, and we need to eat up some of those beans before you can see much of a big run-up.
Did you move any corn on that little rally we saw?
We did move some corn, but mostly to top off the grain bins so we didn't have a peak to get moisture in them. We didn't actually sell any this last time around, but here it is almost the end of January, and I think, you know, next time around, it probably we're gonna be into that March, April, May time period when it's time to do some selling, and you know, don't wait till the middle of the summer.
Now, one of your always never strategies comes up around this time of year. It's never sell soybeans in February. Why?
Absolutely, and maybe this will be the year that the market proves me wrong. I keep thinking it will be once in a while, but so far it hasn't been, because historically the highest price for soybeans in the marketing year has never been in February. It's been close 2 or 3 times, but let's face it, you can just look at the calendar and say, well, I'm going to block this bit of time out, and I'm not going to do anything, because historically selling soybeans in February has been a big loser.
How do you, when you do meetings around this time of year, how do you approach talking about farmers with determining costs of productions or break-evens as they approach the 2017 or any growing season?
That's an interesting question, because that's one of the disagreements I have with a lot of the market analysts, and they say, the first thing they say is, got to figure your cost of production. Well, okay, that's interesting. Cost of production is interesting, but you don't really know what it is until you know what the yield is. And here it is, January, we're 10 months or 9 months away from knowing what it's going to actually going to yield. And until we know what the yield is, we can't know what the break even is, because there's a lot of difference between 40 bushel beans and 70 bushel beans in terms of calculating the break even. The time to do that, well, first of all, I'm not opposed to doing it, but don't hang your hat on it as a marketing strategy, but know what it is. So if by chance we get a big rally and you think you might want to forward contract some, then you can look at those projected break-evens and see where do you have to be to guarantee a profit, and that's what we're looking for.
You don't forward contract a lot anyway in this area, or I guess when you were farming more acres, you didn't forward contract a lot, correct?
I didn't forward contract very much because of the production risk. You know, the worst year I ever had, 1984, average yield on soybeans was around 20 bushels an acre, and boy, if you got any forward contracted and you get a yield like that, it's really disaster.
No irrigation in this area, I should
No
mention.
irrigation, and the one thing we do have is we have good history on crop insurance, and that will keep you from going broke, but it won't necessarily guarantee income.
Next week, Oklahoma State Extension livestock marketing specialist Daryl Peel will join us to look at the USDA's inventory of cattle and calves. In our previous episode of Market Journal, we described how the U.S. and Brazil compete as the world's 2 largest soybean growers. While the United States is the top producer, Brazil has been the #1 exporter for the last 5 years. It has also become a major player in corn, doubling its production within 10 years to hold the #3 slot behind the U.S. and China. Nebraska Extension's Rodrigo Werle is originally from Brazil and recently returned from the southeastern part of the country where the soybean growing season was in full swing. He talked with us at Nebraska Extension's Crop Management Conference in Kearney recently about what the year has been like for Brazilian farmers.
I had the chance to go home over Christmas break, New Year's. I was in the southeast part of the country, São Paulo State, kind of in the southwest part of the state there. I had a chance to spend a couple of days with crop consultants and growers and see what's happening, you know, down in South America.
And how were the conditions?
We spent a lot of time visiting some soybean fields there. The soybean fields that we visited were looking really good. I think they're going to have some really good and promising yields for this year here, and they're going to start harvesting within the next 2-3 weeks here. So their producers there are excited about this cropping season.
Yeah, not anymore here, I guess.
That's
that
right.
answered. Yeah. What were some of the challenges that, in that area, at least, growers faced?
Yeah, so there was a really interesting time that I spent there, things that I had to learn. You know, here in Nebraska, the biggest challenge that we have right now, I would say, are some of these resistant weeds. They're becoming a huge problem. Herbicide resistance is also a problem down there. However, producers down there are also struggling with insects and lots of diseases, which we don't see as much here in Nebraska. So for instance, soybean rust is a big problem for them. They usually spray 2 or 3 times within the growing season. Where I was at, they're having big problems with whiteflies. And if not controlled, they can reduce yields up to 30 to 40%. So we visited lots of fields, saw a very heavy infestation, and that kind of called my attention there. That was really interesting to see.
When we came back from there, I remember farmers talking about how it would be nice to get 2 crops in during the year, but there's no freeze there, so you're battling insects and diseases the entire year round, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're in a tropical country. Sometimes we're harvesting soybeans in one end, planting on the other end. It's a problem. So planting soybeans back to back is not a reality. Those who try to do it get in trouble, and nowadays they're no longer allowed doing it just because of disease and insect pressures that they deal with.
Describe some of the land use issues that Brazil is facing.
Okay, so right where I was at, a common rotation there is having soybeans either after a cereal, wheat. It's a common crop that's grown, spring wheat there, or dry beans. So they harvest those crops, and then they come and they plant their beans. Right after beans, they go into what they call a short season corn. So we have an intensified cropping systems. As long as you have irrigation, you can do the intensified cropping system. As long as you have crops growing year round, your disease pressure, your insect pressure, it just continues. They don't have the nice break that we have here in the winter. So it's a completely different cropping system. So it's really interesting to observe, that difference between, cropping systems in a temperate climatic conditions versus a tropical condition.
Can you describe some of the issues with profits that farmers are facing down there this year?
Well, because of resistance issues, because of insect pressures, because of disease pressures, of continuous cropping seasons, the cost of cropping is increasing tremendously. It looks like it's going to be a good year for soybeans, so producers are still excited. They're still going to be able to pay the bills, but they're concerned about their inputs because year after year it keeps increasing, similar to what we see here.
You mentioned resistance issues that farmers are facing. Go more into that about what it's like down there compared to what it's like up here.
That's right. So I would say conditions there are not as bad as they are right here. I had a chance to visit some of those progressive farmers, and those farmers, they actually came to the United States, particularly to the southern part of the country, where they had the chance to see some palmer amaranth issues that some growers are facing there. So they took that message back home, and I was really impressed with how good of a job they've been doing in keeping the field edges cleaned. If they have weeds out on their field, they actually send crews out there to pull those weeds. So I was really, really impressed with how concerned they are about resistant weeds and how good of a care they're taking of their crops in terms of herbicide resistance management.
The USDA is scheduled to provide its next production projections for Brazil in its World Agricultural Supply and Demand estimates on February 9th. The January Nebraska farmer says livestock producers can buy environmentally friendly bedding that's more absorbent than straw and wood shavings. In this month's issue, Curtis Olson, plant manager of Western Resources Group in Ogallala, says the EcoShred bedding is made from 100% recycled, high-quality cardboard. The project's goal is to maintain a green concept, create jobs at the local level, and keep materials out of a landfill. You can read about some of the unique qualities the product provides in the January Nebraska Farmer. The month of December was slightly colder and wetter than normal in Nebraska. The outlook for February doesn't necessarily lean one way or the other. The Climate Prediction Center with the National Weather Service shows the state has equal chances for above normal and below normal temps, with a probability for higher than usual precipitation in northwest Nebraska. While conditions have varied across the state, Nebraska Extension's Rick Rasby says he thinks cows are generally in pretty good body condition as many producers approach the calving season. We talked with Rick earlier this week about nutritional requirements for the herd, but started by asking how feeding times might impact when cows calve.
Well, the idea is that try to get more cows to calve during the day. I think when you think about it, we're more alert during the day. The other thing is that if they calve during the day as compared to at night, at least you have a better chance of seeing them visually. And so how can you basically, what kind of management strategy can you use to push more of those cows to calve during the day as compared to evening?
Describe the research that has been done on this subject.
Well, quite a bit of research actually, but probably one of the biggest studies would be a study in Iowa that involved 1,300 head of cows, about 15 producers, and so not all those would be, the the same, right? But what they started to do is started to feed the cattle at dusk, somewhere around 5 o'clock, if you will, and then monitored how many calved during the day. And in that study, there would have been about 85% of them that they had calved during the day. And so there's a management tool out there that you can use.
Is there any reason why there's such a big percentage that shifted to calving during the day?
You know, I think that's really the unknown. And what do you do? You know, maybe the idea that you're doing something metabolically with digestion, that it might impact when parturition might start. But there's not, the mechanism's probably not understood, but it has to have to do with when they feed and digestion.
Any difference between the cows that have been around for a while and those first-time heifers?
You know, there's not a lot of data on first calf heifers, and I would probably still implement the same kind of management strategy on the first calf heifers, but understand that you take a look at the age group of the cow herd that would have the most chances of having calving difficulty, first calf heifers. So having more of them calve during the day, I think probably takes a little bit of pressure off, but you'd still probably want to check them frequently throughout the calving season. But at least if you have cows calving during the day, then maybe take less pressure off yourself or your labor force during the evening on the cows and focus on the heifers.
So when do you need to switch to feeding at night rather than during the day?
Well, that's a good question, because the Iowa data would say that they actually got more cows to calve during the day if they started a week, 2 weeks, and 3 weeks prior to calving. So there was no difference whether they started 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. But I would have producers think about starting to implement this management practice probably about 3 weeks prior to the start of the calving season. So if you're a March calver, you're right around the corner.
Any other nutritional thoughts here as we get ready for the calving season?
You know, I think for the most part, cows are in pretty good body condition. We've had a pretty good winter, depending on where you're at. I would just have you think about after calving, especially for young females, boy, getting the energy into them is going to be really important. I think we do a really good job on the protein side of things, but when you take a look at their energy requirement, it's pretty high. So look at the opportunity to get some more energy into them.
Still recommend testing forages if you haven't done that yet?
You bet. You still have the opportunity to go out there and test. And I would really have you think about testing this year, because if you think about spring and when we were trying to get up some of those hays during the spring, it was pretty damp. And you think about what impacts forage quality. It's maturity at harvest, maturity at harvest, maturity at harvest. And so as you delay harvest date, you increase the amount of maturity, and therefore quality goes down. And so I test them. And the other thing is that if you do test, you know where the gaps are. And calves aren't selling for that high a price, but we just need to buckle down just a little bit. And the idea would be to really strategically look at the opportunity to supplement. And if you know quality, you'll do a good job of figuring that out.
We'll put a link to more resources about feeding times impacting when cows calve on the Market Journal website. President Donald Trump this week put the Keystone XL Pipeline back in play. Through a memorandum issued Tuesday, Trump gave another opportunity to TransCanada, the company behind the pipeline, to build the project in Nebraska and other states. A separate memorandum from the president requested a plan for using American materials and equipment to construct or fix pipelines in the U.S. Nebraska Extension Ag and Water Law Specialist Dave Aiken joined us Wednesday to explain what happens now after Trump's action this week.
Well, he basically is inviting TransCanada to reapply for a new permit, which he gave every indication that he would approve. He also is putting together a Made in America thing so that they can negotiate some American parts, higher level American parts, I would guess, in terms of the pipeline if it's ever built.
This is quite a change.
Well, yes. President Obama turned down the permit, a little over a year ago, so it's a 180-degree change.
What happens next year, Dave?
Well, they've got to, if they apply, they'll apply for the federal permit, and if they get the federal permit, they'll still need a state permit in Nebraska from the Public Service Commission so that they can exercise the right of condemnation on their right-of-way for the pipeline in Nebraska.
Now, Nebraska had already approved a route for the pipeline, correct?
That's right. Governor Heineman did that about 4 years ago, but the legislation that upon which that approval was based is pretty suspect, and they're just going to need to start over and do a reset on it.
I'll ask here what the Public Service Commission does, and I think you've explained on here before, but for a refresher, can you explain what the PSC does?
Sure. They are in the Nebraska Constitution, and they handle a bunch of utility-related things like pipelines and high power lines and that type of thing.
Pipeline safety regulation?
No, that is done by the Federal Department of Transportation. Their regulations are pretty good, however, but the Public Service Commission will, of course, be able to look at the environmental impact of pipeline construction, and that is one of the big concerns.
How long do you think their permitting process will take?
It's supposed to be between 7 and 12 months from whenever TransCanada files their application.
Describe how that process will work.
Well, there will be a formal public hearing and then probably at least one or more public meetings where people will be able to come in and give their opinion for or against. And once, if TransCanada does apply, then the details about when those meetings would be and where would come out after that.
Do you think the pipeline will make it through this time?
Well, it depends on whether TransCanada tries to cut corners the way they did the first time around. If they understand they need to protect the aquifer and kind of bend over backwards to do that, then they have a very good chance of getting their state permit. If they try to cut corners and stuff, then it's going to be a little rocky.
There will be challenges to this coming, right?
Absolutely. Whoever is unhappy with whatever the Public Service Commission decides, he'll take it to court, and that's another year and a half plus for the appeals to run on that. So it's not going to be anytime soon. When
we talk about eminent domain and condemnation, what happens with the land that TransCanada has already agreed to use? What happens to the landowners there in compensation?
It depends on how the actual document is written. My expectation would be is that TransCanada covered themselves completely so that those are in force still. But if you have questions, consult your attorney.
Final question, is it a given, do you think, that TransCanada, when this happens, if it's a few years down the road even, will for sure do the pipeline?
It's really got to be iffy right now because oil prices are about half what they were in 2008 when this pipeline was originally proposed. And the tar sands oil is expensive oil. It's expensive to extract, it's expensive to process, and with oil prices where they are right now, it's hard to see how that would really pay. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see.
Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we again for the weekly forecast. And of course, during this last week, the big news was a snowstorm that moved across the state that dumped some significant amounts in northern Nebraska. That system developed over the Central Rockies, and as we moved into the day Tuesday, started to make its way across the state, and finally exited out toward the Great Lakes region. As we went into the day Wednesday, that left a pretty significant band of snow across the northern part of the state, with lesser totals across the southern part of the state. When we look at the liquid equivalent moisture associated with the storm, essentially the bottom two southern tier counties in the state had less than 1/10 of an inch on general. Then as we moved up to the I-80 corridor, generally 1/10 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. And as we moved up just to the north of the I-80 corridor, that's where the precipitation total started to jack up rather significantly. And we had between 1/4 and 1/2 inch up into the southern sandhills. Then, of course, with the main path of storm across extreme northern Nebraska, anywhere from 3/4 of an inch to 1.25 inches has been reported. In terms of snowfall, about the southern sandhills northward, we had better than 8 inches of snowfall, and as long as you got along the South Dakota border from north central Nebraska to northeast Nebraska, totals varying anywhere from 15 inches and unofficially up to 22 inches that we've heard so far. We still have to receive that official data. So a very significant snowstorm. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, we don't have to worry about any significant weather, at least for the next week. So we're going to have a calm period with increasing chances for warmer temperatures moving in, particularly as we get into the early part of the week, before we turn our attention to yet another series of storms moving into California that will probably impact us as we go into the first full week of February. So as we go to the upper air models, what we will notice is that we have this northerly flow and a piece of energy moving down. So there is a chance for some flurry activity, at least through the early part of the day, and then that will start to shift toward the east as we see this flow kind of centered over Iowa as we go into tomorrow, with this ridge starting to build back in, bringing much warmer conditions. But we do get one secondary push of cold air, but that will basically scoot to the northeast of us, and then as that sags in, we see that jet stream over top of us, but there's really no moisture because the mountains are stripping it out, and now the ridge starts to build back in with all the energy over the Great Lakes region. Here comes our next storm system on Wednesday, starting to make its way into the western United States, but it kind of stalls out and slowly migrates eastward from Thursday and Friday into the Intermountain region, and this system will start to eject out into the Central Plains as we get around the 4th of the month. And if that does indeed happen, we are looking at some place in the Central Plains that will see some accumulating snowfall, and it looks like there will be a series of storms just like the past typical storms coming into California, probably a series of 2 or 3 storms that will move out into the Central Plains. So there'll be numerous opportunities for precipitation as we go forward in time. And now if we look at the precipitation, you can see it's pretty much white across the country, and we'll be watching the western seaboard as we go through Sunday for some of that action to start moving into the Pacific Northwest, and eventually it'll start to drop down into California, particularly as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, and start making its way inward. So here we are on Tuesday, the first of that precipitation from that storm coming in. We start to see it congeal across the western United States, and we're looking at some significant heavy precipitation once again for California, making its way into the Sierras. And by the time we get into Friday, we start to see some of that energy pushing out into the High Plains region, and we'll expect the whole system itself to move out as we get late in the next weekend. In terms of the temperature precipitation forecast, the temperatures are looking to be colder than normal from next Thursday to the following Tuesday as that system starts to make its way into the Central Plains. And in terms of precipitation, a broad swath of the northern United States will see increasing levels of moisture as these systems move from the southwest to the northeast.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean prices, Brazil's growing season, feeding times impacting calving, and the Keystone XL Pipeline. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Next week, Darrell Peel will look at the January cattle report, and Bob Klein will talk about managing herbicide costs. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.